In this video, we're going to talk about something that happens in almost every kitchen: freezing food. It sounds smart, right? You make a little extra, pop it in the freezer, and think, I'll save it for later. But here's the truth: some foods simply don't belong there. The freezer can quietly ruin the taste, texture, and even safety of foods you love. So, in this video, I'll walk you through 9 everyday foods that seem freezer safe but really aren't, and I'll explain what happens to them, why they change, and what you can do instead. By the end, you'll know exactly what belongs in your freezer and what to keep out for the sake of taste, texture, and peace of mind. Before we start, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Just drop your state or city in the comments below. And if you have any natural health tips of your own, feel free to share those too. Someone else might really benefit from hearing what's worked for you. Point 1: Leafy greens and lettuce. Let's start with something most of us love: a fresh, crisp salad. Romaine, iceberg, spinach, arugula, they're light, refreshing, and full of life. But the moment you try to freeze them, that life disappears. Many people, especially those living alone, think freezing lettuce will help it last longer. It feels practical: less waste, less money lost. But when you thaw it, what comes out of that bag is not the same beautiful green you remember putting in. Here's what really happens. Leafy greens are made mostly of water. When they freeze, that water turns into tiny ice crystals inside the leaves. Those crystals expand and burst the delicate cell walls of the greens. Once you thaw them, the water drains out, leaving the leaves limp, wet, and slimy. The crisp crunch is gone, replaced by something that feels like damp paper. It's not dangerous, but it's not something you'd enjoy eating either. Now, I know how easy it is to think, well, I'll just use it later for a quick salad. But lettuce doesn't bounce back after freezing. Even if it still smells fine, the texture is ruined. And for many older adults, who enjoy food not just for nutrition but for pleasure, that can be disappointing. There is one little exception though: if you plan to cook your greens, freezing can still work. Spinach, kale, or collard greens can be frozen for soups, casseroles, or stews. Just blanch them first, that means boiling for a minute and then cooling quickly, and store them in airtight containers. But for anything you want to eat raw, like a salad, skip the freezer. Instead, buy smaller portions, or switch to heartier greens like cabbage, which stay fresh longer. And remember, that crisp bite you miss from your younger days? It's not your memory fading. It's just that lettuce never forgives the freezer. Point 2: Mayonnaise-based salads. Now let's talk about another freezer mistake that catches many people by surprise: mayonnaise-based salads. You know the ones: potato salad, chicken salad, egg salad, tuna salad. They're the classic comfort foods we've made for years, especially around family gatherings or church picnics. And it seems harmless to pop the leftovers into the freezer to save for later. But the truth is, these creamy dishes don't survive the cold very well. Here's why. Mayonnaise isn't just one ingredient, it's an emulsion, which means it's a delicate blend of oil, egg yolk, and a little acid like vinegar or lemon juice. When you freeze it, that balance breaks apart. The oil separates from the water, and when you thaw it, the salad turns watery, lumpy, and sometimes even a little sour. The smooth, creamy texture you remember is gone, replaced by something grainy and strange. For older adults, that change can be extra disappointing. We often reach for foods like these because they're soft, comforting, and familiar. But once they've been frozen, the flavor and feel are all wrong. And it's not just about taste. Uneven moisture can also make these salads less safe if they weren't sealed or thawed properly. That's a risk none of us want to take. If you really want to save your leftovers, here's a smarter way. Freeze the main ingredients separately: the cooked potatoes, the diced chicken, or the boiled eggs, without the mayonnaise. When you're ready to eat, thaw those parts and add the mayo fresh. It takes just a few minutes, but the taste and texture will be so much better. Point 3. Fried foods. Ah, fried food, just saying those words brings back memories, doesn't it? Maybe it's Sunday dinners with the family, that golden fried chicken everyone loved, or the crispy onion rings you used to order on special occasions. There's something deeply satisfying about that first crunchy bite. It's not just taste, it's comfort, nostalgia, and joy all rolled into one. But here's the sad truth: once fried food goes into the freezer, that magic crunch rarely comes back. When you freeze fried foods, the moisture inside starts to move around. Ice crystals form, and as they melt during thawing, that moisture gets trapped in the crispy coating. What was once light and crunchy becomes soft, soggy, or chewy. Even if you try to fix it with the oven or an air fryer, it never quite returns to its original glory. That satisfying crunch that made you smile, it's gone. This happens with almost all homemade fried foods: chicken, fish fillets, pork chops, breaded shrimp, even your favorite fried vegetables. Commercial frozen fried foods, like store-bought fries or nuggets, are made differently. They're flash frozen at special temperatures and coated to survive the cold. But when we make things at home, our recipes simply aren't built for that. For older adults, this can feel frustrating. You cook extra to save energy and time, thinking you're being smart, but later, when you reheat it, the meal feels flat and disappointing. And sometimes, fried foods that sit too long before freezing or aren't sealed well can even go rancid from leftover oil. Point 4. Whole eggs in the shell. Now here's one that surprises almost everyone: freezing whole eggs in their shells. It sounds harmless, right? You've got a few extras, maybe you're heading out of town, and you think, I'll just toss them in the freezer so they don't go bad. But trust me, that simple idea can turn into a messy little science experiment. Eggs are mostly water, and water expands when it freezes. So, when you put a raw egg, shell and all, into the freezer, that expansion has nowhere to go. The shell cracks or even bursts open, leaking sticky egg white all over your freezer drawer. And if you've ever had to clean up frozen egg, you know it's not an easy job. Even if the shell doesn't break, the freezing process changes the egg's texture in ways you can't fix later. Once thawed, the whites turn thin and watery, and the yolks get thick and jelly-like. They don't scramble the same, they don't bake the same, and they definitely don't taste the same. Hard-boiled eggs aren't safe either. The whites become rubbery, and the yolks turn crumbly. It's not unsafe, but it's unpleasant, especially if you were hoping for that soft, fluffy omelette or smooth egg salad you love. The good news is, there's a better way. If you really need to freeze eggs, crack them first. Beat the whites and yolks together gently, pour them into an ice cube tray or small containers, and freeze them that way. You can even label each portion: 1 cube equals 1 egg. When you're ready to cook, just thaw what you need. Some people add a tiny pinch of salt or sugar to keep the texture smooth, depending on whether they'll use it for savory dishes or baking. Point 5. Cucumbers and tomatoes. Let's talk about two of the most refreshing foods in the kitchen: cucumbers and tomatoes. Whether you enjoy them in a salad, on a sandwich, or sliced with a little salt, they bring that cool, juicy freshness that feels light and comforting. It's no wonder many people try to freeze them to make them last longer. But sadly, these two are among the worst foods to put in your freezer. Here's the simple reason: both cucumbers and tomatoes are made up of more than 90% water. When that water freezes, it turns into ice crystals that burst the tiny cell walls inside the vegetable. Once you thaw them, all that water leaks out, leaving behind something soft, slimy, and far from what you remember. Cucumbers lose their crunch and turn mushy, while tomatoes collapse into a watery mess. What once tasted fresh and crisp now feels lifeless. Now, tomatoes do have one small exception. If you plan to cook them later, for example, in soups, stews, or pasta sauces, freezing can work. Their texture may change, but the flavor can still shine through when cooked down. Just don't expect to slice them for sandwiches or salads after freezing. That's where disappointment sets in. As for cucumbers, freezing almost always ruins them. Even in smoothies or cold soups, they lose their pleasant taste and become watery and bitter. For older adults who shop less often or live alone, it's understandable to want to make produce last longer. Instead of freezing, here are better options. Keep tomatoes at room temperature, out of direct sunlight, and refrigerate cucumbers wrapped in a paper towel to prevent moisture buildup. If you grow your own or buy in bulk, try pickling cucumbers or canning tomatoes, old-fashioned methods that still work beautifully and preserve flavor without ruining texture. Point 6. Cooked pasta and rice. Pasta and rice, two of the easiest comfort foods ever made. They fill the kitchen with warmth, they're simple to prepare, and they can stretch into several meals. It's no wonder many of us like to make a big batch and freeze the extra portions. After all, it feels smart, less cooking, less cleanup. But here's the catch, cooked pasta and rice don't come out of the freezer the same way they went in. When you cook pasta or rice, they soak up water and become soft. But when frozen, that water forms ice crystals, which tear apart their structure. Once thawed, those delicate starches collapse, and what you get is mushy, sticky, or unevenly textured food. Have you ever reheated frozen spaghetti only to find it clumped together in one big gummy lump? Or thawed rice that was hard in some spots and soggy in others? That's exactly what happens when starch and ice don't play nicely together. Now, the good news is, there are ways to make it a little better if freezing is your only option. The secret is to undercook your pasta or rice slightly, keep it al dente, which means firm to the bite. This gives it some strength to hold up through freezing and reheating. Second, toss the pasta with a bit of oil before freezing so it doesn't stick together. Third, always let it cool completely before sealing it in a flat, airtight container. That helps it freeze evenly. But here's the honest truth, if you want that fresh, satisfying texture, fluffy rice or perfectly springy noodles, it's best not to freeze them already cooked. Instead, freeze the sauce or the stir-fry ingredients separately, then make a small fresh batch of rice or pasta when you're ready to eat. It takes only a few minutes, but the difference in taste and texture is huge. Point 7. Dairy products. Dairy can be tricky when it comes to freezing. Some items handle it just fine, things like butter, blocks of hard cheese, or small portions of milk for cooking. But others, especially the creamy ones we love most, simply don't make it through the freezer unharmed. I'm talking about sour cream, yogurt, cream cheese, cottage cheese, and large containers of milk. These soft, comforting foods often lose their smooth texture and familiar taste after freezing, and that can be a real letdown. Here's why it happens. Dairy is a blend of water, fat, and protein. When you freeze it, the water separates and forms tiny ice crystals. Once thawed, those crystals melt and leave behind a grainy, watery mixture instead of that creamy consistency you remember. If you've ever thawed frozen yogurt or sour cream, you've seen it, the curdled look, the watery top, and that odd, broken texture. It's safe to eat, but it's not pleasant. For older adults, this change can be especially frustrating. Creamy foods are comforting, they're gentle on the teeth and easy to swallow, but they also bring back good memories. A spoonful of smooth yogurt in the morning or cream cheese on toast feels familiar, like part of a daily rhythm. But once those foods lose their texture, they lose their comfort too. Now, if you really have to freeze dairy, say you're traveling or want to avoid waste, here's the trick. Plan to use it for cooking, not for eating plain. Thawed sour cream or yogurt might not be great on a baked potato, but they're still fine in soups, casseroles, or baked dishes where texture doesn't matter as much. To avoid waste, try buying smaller containers or dividing soft dairy into single-serving portions so you can finish them fresh. A little planning can keep your meals creamy and satisfying, without any freezer regrets. Because food should always feel as good as it tastes. Point 8. Cooked potatoes. Potatoes are one of those foods that always feel like home. Mashed, baked, or roasted, they've been there for family dinners, holidays, and those quiet nights when all you want is something warm and filling. It's no wonder many people try to freeze them, especially if they've made a big batch and don't want to waste a single spoonful. But sadly, cooked potatoes rarely come back the same once they've been frozen. The problem lies in their starch. When you cook potatoes, the starch absorbs water and softens. That's what makes mashed potatoes so creamy and baked ones so fluffy. But once you freeze them, that water turns into ice crystals, and those crystals damage the potato's structure. When you thaw it later, the smooth, light texture disappears. What you get instead can be dry, grainy, or oddly glue-like. Have you ever reheated frozen mashed potatoes and found they turned into a heavy, dense blob? That's the freezer's fault, not yours. Boiled potatoes, like the ones used in potato salad, don't do much better. They become watery, soft, and sometimes fall apart completely. Even though they're technically safe to eat, the comfort and taste we expect from potatoes are gone, and for many older adults, that's a real disappointment. There are ways to make it a little better if freezing is necessary. When mashing potatoes, add extra fat, butter, cream, or milk, because fat helps protect the texture during freezing. Portion them into small containers so they thaw evenly, and reheat them gently on the stove instead of the microwave. But honestly, the best solution is to cook potatoes fresh whenever possible. If you like to plan ahead, you can peel and blanch, partially cook, raw potatoes, freeze them in chunks, and finish cooking them later. That way, you keep their flavor and texture much closer to the real thing. Point 9. Coffee and juice. For many of us, a hot cup of coffee in the morning or a glass of orange juice with breakfast is more than just a habit, it's a little moment of peace. That first sip can lift your mood, wake up your mind, and remind you that the day is off to a good start. So, it makes sense that some people try to freeze leftover coffee or extra juice to avoid waste. But here's the truth, freezing these drinks often takes away the very thing we love about them, their flavor. Let's start with coffee. When brewed coffee is frozen, it loses its aroma and depth. Those rich, roasted notes that make it taste alive begin to fade. After a week or two in the freezer, it can turn flat or even a little bitter. Coffee also absorbs smells easily, so if it isn't sealed perfectly, it might come out tasting like the other foods sitting nearby, and nobody wants coffee that smells faintly of fish or chili. Even coffee ice cubes, which some people use for iced drinks, can pick up freezer odors if left too long. Juice doesn't fare much better. Most fruit juices, especially orange juice, separate when frozen. The pulp sinks, the liquid floats, and once it thaws, you're left with a watery texture and a weaker taste. Apple juice may lose its crispness, and grape juice can turn cloudy. While it's still safe to drink, it never tastes quite the same as fresh. If you want to save these beverages, freeze them only in small portions and use them for cooking or smoothies, not for sipping straight. For example, thawed juice works fine in baking, and frozen coffee can be added to desserts or used for making iced drinks right away. So, there you have it, 9 everyday foods that just don't belong in the freezer. Leafy greens that turn slimy, creamy salads that separate, fried foods that lose their crunch, we've all been there. And the truth is, none of these mistakes come from carelessness. They come from good intentions, from wanting to save money, avoid waste, and make life a little easier. But sometimes, what seems practical ends up stealing the pleasure from our food. So the next time you're cleaning up the kitchen and thinking, maybe I should just freeze this, pause for a second. Ask yourself, will I actually enjoy this when it comes out of the freezer? If the answer is no, maybe it's better to share it, repurpose it, or simply make a smaller batch next time. The freezer can be a wonderful helper, but it's not a magic box. Knowing what belongs there, and what doesn't, keeps your meals tasty, your body healthy, and your heart happy. Because good food, no matter how simple, deserves to be enjoyed the way it was meant to be. Now I'd love to hear from you. What's one food you've frozen before that didn't turn out the way you hoped? Tell me in the comments, your story might just help someone else save a good meal.